read, we're in Psalm 127, and these are Psalms of ascent, and we've been talking about there's a little pattern to these Psalms of ascent. There's usually a problem, and then it shows how God's the solution, and then our response to it. So last week, it was surprising to me that there was this psalm that is called for joy and joy, but it was really a psalm of lament, that the psalmist was praying for God to restore them. And so what was interesting now as I got into this week, the answer for their prayer to God, for God to restore, is not for them to do a bunch of stuff. The call for us, like what do? There's a call to rest. He tells us to go to sleep. He tells us to take a nap. And because it's not that we don't do anything or don't have a role, it's that we have a rest, that we have a trust that God is the one that is going to restore. God is the one that is going to work. And what we see in Psalm 127 and really into Psalm 128, they're wisdom psalms. They help us navigate the things of life. And what Psalm 127 does is it sort of encapsulates the primary things that occupy our time: family and work, right? So if you wake up each day, those are the things that usually occupy your time, like whatever your vocation is at this time, and then whoever your family and your relationships and church family is at the time. It's the two main occupations of what we're supposed to be about as people, or where we spend our time is work and family. And so what I want to show today is how Psalm 127 allows us to work to fulfill this call that God has given us, but to do it from a position of rest. That Psalm 127 is very honest about the challenges of life. He talks about how labor can be vain. It can cause us to stay awake at night. It talks about how work can be an anxious toil. And then his case for children, he wants to show, hey, not just now when they're little, but how you're investing in kids now actually is your protection for the future. So he wants to motivate us and say, like, hey, what you're doing in the daily grind of work, what you're doing in the daily grind of raising a family will cause a future flourishing. There can be purpose to it. And how he does that is he wants us to have a different perspective on work and on family. He changes our view of it. It changes our perspective of it. In verse 3, he says, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. He says, hey, I want you to look at this. I want you to look at this in a different way. I want you to look at these things in the way that I view them. And so while he's honest about this sort of daily grind of work and family, he gives us a new perspective. He gives us a perspective that gives purpose and value to these things, that they actually will matter. And so what we want to see is that your perspective matters. I can't handle a lot of new music. I like music that I know the words to, that I can sing along. So I just find something I like and I listen to it a lot. I kind of wear it out. And so lately, or in the past 6-7 months, I have been going back to a lot of stuff that I listened to like in high school. And so think of like 90s alternative sort of music, so your Pearl Jams, Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, Bush, that stuff like that. And one, I think it's helpful because I think if you need to deal with sort of some angst in the world or angst in you, 90s alternative music did a really good job of that. Maybe that's one of the problems with kids. They think everything's supposed to be perfect all the time, right? No, just go listen to 90s music and you'll say it'll be a little cynical and a little angst to it. Well, with this, my kids now listen to it and really enjoy it. And so it can become issues when Alana wakes up and Alexa, play Even Flow, right? And so she's waking up to Pearl Jam. And you'll ask Weston, what's your favorite song? He's like, Alive. Alive is definitely my favorite song. And so you guys can go Google Even Flow and Alive later. And so it was interesting. So Karina's like, hey, that's probably... maybe not the best. If you listen to some of the lyrics, and I was like, yeah, I've listened to lyrics, and in one sense it leads to good conversations, in another sense it's like, yeah, it's probably not stuff that 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds need to deal with. But so I needed a good argument to show why this was helpful. So sorry this is dragging on a little bit. I had a friend post on Facebook the background to the song Alive, like what it's about. He says, you're still alive, and do I deserve to be? And so it's the story of Eddie Vedder, who is the lead singer of his mom comes to him and tells him two things that were bad news at the same time. He said, hey, this man that you think is your father is not. That's not your real dad. The man who has been raising you is not your real dad. So he's a teenager, and he gets this news. And then she goes, and on top of that, your real dad passed away a couple years ago. So you never knew him, you never got to meet him. And hence, the song, Alive. And the song, when he sings, I'm alive, but do I deserve to be? His rendition, why he wrote the song, is he saw this as a curse. Like, he did not even want to be alive once he got this news. So he always viewed this incident in his life as a curse. And this song was him dealing with his sort of teenage angst. So fast forward, they become famous, blows up and everything, and then he starts playing this song hundreds and hundreds of times, and he says as he watched the crowd, they saw it as an anthem of celebration. They would be in the seats and in the rows, and they would be singing and belting out, and it was a song of hope for them. And so what was a song of curse and angst and pain for him was a song of blessing and life. They're saying, like, no, I'm alive. I'm celebrating that. After all I've been through, I am actually here and alive. And he said, listening to the perspective of those that heard it, changed his perspective of the song. He said, the curse was lifted. And that's what's going on here. The perspective on work and children and family, which many of us can look as burdensome. Even Genesis 3 says they're a curse, right? Like, by the sweat of your brow you will work the ground. Cursed is the ground because of you. You will have pain in childbearing, and that's not just having the baby, that's like raising them. It's going to be a curse. But what Psalm 127 wants to do is change our perspective on that. To look at things that often can feel like a daily grind, can feel like a curse, can feel like a burden. When we look at them through a different lens, when we look at them through God's perspective, they actually become life and value and meaning and purpose and good and a blessing. And so we need to have this right perspective on these things that really take up the main occupations of our life. Josh Moody in his commentary says, this psalm is painting a picture of reality. So it's very, very honest about what's going on. And it is asking you to watch and behold life like that. It's saying, seeing life as it were through the eyes of God. That is, with his perspective. Psalm 127 is inviting us to see life through the perspective of God. And when we do that, it is the way not to live in vain. So you want to have meaning in work, you want to have meaning in your family, you want to have meaning in the community that God has placed you, view it all through the lens of God. View it all through the perspective of God. And what we see here is that this psalm will show that without the Lord, the sort of the toil of life, it's worthless. They even use the word vain, and it's a different word than vanity. I know Crosspoint, if you were here for Ecclesiastes, we love the word vanity, right? It means it's a vapor. It's going to go away. The word vain here is a different Hebrew word, and it means nothingness. It means that it's not going to last. It's not going to have significance. It's not going to matter. It's going to turn into nothing. And so we want something better than that. We were designed for something better than that. We want a life that has purpose and value and meaning. And so what we see in this psalm is we're going to look at the purpose in life. And I really want to camp out like on the position or the posture that we can have so we can actually live a life that matters, that have meaning, and then some practices that will actually help us do that. And so what we see first is this a purpose. There's a call to build. There's a call to work. There's a call to cultivate. There's a call to expand and multiply. verse 1 shows just this idea of working. It says, unless the Lord builds, there's the word builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. There's a call to build. There's a call to labor. Verse 3 says, eating the bread of anxious toil. Eating the bread means that there's a call to working to provide. And so I'm going to get into a posture of rest, but I want to be clear, and the Bible's abundantly clear, is that there's a call to work. There's always been a call to work in the scriptures. There's a call to work even before the curse, right? God said, I'm going to make man in my image. And he says, I'm going to place them in the garden to work it and keep it. He calls us to be fruitful and multiply. So in the scriptures, work is not bad. Work is a gift. It's good. It's what we're created for. Colossians 3 says, whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord. Work heartily unto the Lord. So again, there's a call to work, a call to provide. A challenge that we have is that we have this sort of weird mix of like sort of Eastern religion and sort of Western industrialization, I'll call it. In Eastern religions, if you kind of get to the core of Hinduism and Buddhism and religions like that, they get to a point where the physical is bad. That it's only spiritual, that you just want to become like a being. You actually want to get away from the physical. And that's not a biblical view. The Bible says, no. We're physical. We're physical beings. God created a physical world. It is good. That's not the problem. But that can kind of become our motivation. Like that work is bad. I don't want to do anything. You sort of see it with our American idea of retirement, right? What do you see with retirement oftentimes? A lot of times, not everybody, people will work. They'll work their sort of fingers to the bone. They'll kind of make a train wreck of their family, all for this goal of then doing nothing. I want to get to this point in my life where I don't have to do anything. And it's just not biblical. It's not good. It's not a good goal. And part of it comes from this Western view of work. The American dream, like we work hard. And what happens is we begin to overvalue work. And then we begin to work all the time, right? It's hard to turn off. Literally now, with our phone, it is hard to turn off work. It's hard to just take a day to stop, to not work. And so we have this weird mix of sort of like this Eastern where we don't want to, like sort of the ultimate goal is not to work, not to do anything, but we just run ourselves into the ground trying to get there. And we can't turn it off and we can't stop working. And the biblical view of work is like, no, work is good. You're created for it. You should do it, but it shouldn't dominate you. It shouldn't be what you do all the time. There's other things of value to do as well. The second thing we see is a call to build the community. There's a call to protect, to do what's good for those around you. Look at verse 2. It says, unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. There's a call for people, there's a call for Christians to seek the flourishing, to seek the well-being of the place that God has placed us, to care for those. That the call of a Christian is that we don't just live for ourselves, but we have a concern for others. We have a concern for the well-being of the community. Part of that concern, part of that heart of God is to be an advocate, to provide security, to provide protection for those who are vulnerable in any community. To be about mercy, to be about justice, to be about compassion, to defend those who can't defend themselves. A lot of people try to get me to tell them who I'm going to vote for, and that's weird. I'm a pastor. Larry and I were talking about this. Like, no. God cares about Republicans and God cares about Democrats, okay? He cares about all of them. My job is to love people where they're at. Each party has things that are more according to the kingdom of God and things that are less according to the kingdom of God about them all. So neither of them are perfect. They both have struggles. And so one thing that we have to do is have lots of conversations with our kids. They parrot things about politics that would never come out of our mouth, that they have never heard at home. They hear it at school, they hear it from people, they hear it from friends, they hear all sorts of things. It's really sad. So we have to sort of like undo some things that they're hearing and redo them for their own good. And so Will was asking me yesterday when we were driving about voting. And I said, here's some things and I kind of gave my list that I look at that I think are important. And I said, one of the things, not the only thing, one of the things that I think is important is the security and the protection of people who are more vulnerable, those that are oppressed. I go, truthfully, buddy, I didn't do anything for this, but I am probably like one of the safest people in our country. I am a middle-aged, white male that's like upper class. He goes, wait, we're upper class? And I was like, not at your school, but in general, we live in Jupiter, so in Florida, we are upper class. In America, we are upper class. In the world, we are definitely upper class, okay? So I said, I am in a position where I have security and protection that other people don't have. I just do. I sat in a room Thursday with pastors, about 12 of them, church planters in South Florida, half white, half different ethnicities, African, Hispanic, Caribbean, and to listen to them talk about some of the political and racial things that go on in the world, like they are dealing with a different world than I ever have to deal with. They have to worry about different things than I never even dream of. And again, not because I did anything, I was just born, right? It's not my fault, it's not there. And so I told him when I vote, and voting is just one day of, every 3 years and 364 days. So when I vote, that's part of the factors that I think through. Who's the most vulnerable, and not just one kind of vulnerable person, like who overall is vulnerable? Who's going to help care for those people as well? And again, so I'll cast my vote, but I said what's more important is that we live lives the other 3 years, 364 days, that go and are advocates for people who are vulnerable, families who are vulnerable, right? Orphans, widows, the poor, the impoverished, right? The call of the Christian is to provide security and protection for people, for our communities. And that's what he's driving at. Like there's a call to that. There's a call to be a watchman, to provide security. There's also a call to multiply, to build a family. This brings purpose. Look at verses 3-5. One commentator said he's actually, he's like, this is a generalization, so I'm offending everybody today. He's like, in general, most of the time, women, they want to have children. He said, a lot of times, men, they can see like the sort of financial bottom line of children, or they think the children are going to cause them to not do the things that they want to do. And so they're not as excited. He says what he's doing in verses 3-5 is he's making a case to show why having children, particularly to men, is a big deal. Why you should want it, why you should pursue it, why you should give your life to it. And so he's making his argument. He says, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. He says, blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. The word for sons that he used is the word for build. That when you have a family, whether they're your biological children or your spiritual children, you are building into something else. You are multiplying yourself. You are building. And it says that they're a heritage. He says they're a reward. He says they're a weapon. He's making the case that children are a good thing, right? Because there's parts of the world and parts of different places where it's like, hey, we're gonna limit the number of kids that we have. We're gonna limit these things. And he's saying, no, you're actually sort of hanging yourself, because that's gonna backfire on you later on. What he's saying with these pictures of heritage and reward and weapons, he's saying like kids, we think of kids often that we're going to pour into them. He said, no, raise up kids right, because they're going to advocate for you. They're your heritage. They're your reward. They're your weapon to protect you as you get old. Make sense? We always think of kids like, hey, what do I have to do for them? His view of it, his perspective is like, no, invest in kids because what they're going to do for you when you can't do it for yourself. Moody put it this way. He says, this perspective of God is saying, children do not inherit, parents inherit. It is saying children do not get rewarded, parents get rewarded. It is saying children do not make us weak, old, and exhausted. They make us ready for battle. He wants us to have a different perspective on children. He said, together the puzzle pieces create a picture of children as your reward, your inheritance, and your arrows. Because when you are older, having strong, godly children around you will protect you. He is making a case to build, to multiply, to invest. Verse 5 says, blessed is the man who fills the quiver with them. Why? For he will not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. His children are there to what? Protect him, to care for him. And that's what we're to be about. And so when we have this view that children can be a hindrance or they're kind of like a penalty, like, oh man, you got the kids. Like, well, yeah, no, how about I got the kids? Yes, it's going to be a good thing. Or children as annoyance. What this is saying is like, no, kids are a heritage. They're not a hindrance. It gives you a long view that they're going to, there's a reward at the end. Moms, dads, guess what? Reward at the end. It's going to be a gift. They're a prize and not a penalty. They will be a gift to you. Your investment in them, remember we talked about it, bear fruit, or sow the seed and for later it will bear fruit. Like sowing that seed now will be a prize, a gift in the future. And it says that they're an arrow and not an annoyance. That kids ultimately will protect you. They will be there for you. And the thing that makes kids these things, a heritage, a reward, and a weapon, is when they're from the Lord. When they are of the Lord. Children are a heritage from the Lord. That's what makes them an asset. That's what makes them a reward. That's what makes them a weapon. And that's why it's really foolish of our culture. Think about how much our culture invests in kids. We try and keep up sometimes, and we have to stop trying to keep up, right? It's exhausting. The amount that our culture invests in kids, but the foolishness that we invest so much in the kids, and then we keep them away from the one thing that matters most. We keep them away from God. We're so busy doing everything else that we're too busy for God's family. We're too busy for God's people. We're too busy to be in God's community, which is going to be the one thing that actually keeps our kids. That's going to make our kids last. And so there's this call to see children as a heritage, a reward, and warriors, and knowing that they're from the Lord. So there's a call to build, the daily grind. There's purpose behind all of it. And in one sense, everybody, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, pretty much will value these things, right? You don't have to be a Christian to value work. You don't have to be a Christian to value the well-being of the community. Like, at the heart of why people are so passionate about the political climate in our country, like, I've talked to 3 people these past 2 weeks that their family members are not talking to each other. Why are people so passionate about it? Well, they want what's good for their community. Like, I don't think it's a very good way to go about it, but like there is a source of that. They are so passionate. Why? Because everybody wants the good of a community. We have different views on how to get there, right? But we don't have to be a Christian to value that. We see that in our climate right now. So you don't have to be a Christian to value work and to value community, to value family. These things are all God's common grace. God gives all these things to people who don't even believe in him, who don't even trust him. But what this psalm reveals is there is a fundamental difference in how we go about those things. If you're a follower of Christ or not a follower of Christ. And the difference is in our motivation. It's in our position. It's in our perspective, the way that we view life. And what we see is the motivation. There's two options that we can be motivated from a position of acceptance, or we're motivated trying to gain acceptance. If I work hard enough, if I'm successful enough, if my kids get into the right school, right? Karina's doing some admission stuff. Number one question she gets quite often, what schools do your kids go to from Jupiter Christian School? They want to know where they're going to go. If my kids go here, then I'm successful. What is all that? I'm looking for acceptance. I am working from a position to gain acceptance. And these come from two different attitudes towards God. There's two different attitudes we have. We're either going to live out of acceptance, that we're dependent on God, or we're going to live for acceptance, where we're living independent of God. And what Psalm 127 is calling us to do is to live out of a posture, live out of a position, be motivated acceptance. Verse 1 says, unless the Lord builds. The follower of Christ is one that trusts in the Lord to do the building, the Lord to do the work. Verse 2 says that the Lord watches, that we can protect and provide security and seek the good of the most vulnerable around us. But ultimately, it's the Lord that's watching over it all. His ways are going to come about. Verse 2 then says, he gives his beloved sleep. These two things give us two different pictures, two different motivations. One is a posture of independence. It's all about you. And when it's all about you, it means it's all on you. It's on you to be successful at work. It's on you to have a successful family. It's on you to make sure your community is safe and secure. Can we understand why people are so stressed out? That's a lot to be on you. And it leads to earning, attaining. It's about your power, and ultimately it leads to what it says here, anxious toil. It means you're going, and you never arrive. And it says it's vain. What you're building, when it's all on you, won't last. Once you're gone, it's gone. But there's the second motivation. It's living out of a posture of dependence. It's a dependence on God. And this is not about you anymore. It's all about God. It's depending on him. It's trusting on him. The Lord builds. The Lord watches. The Lord. This is the posture of Christianity. And it doesn't lead to earning. It leads to acceptance. You're beloved. You're already beloved. No matter how successful you are at work or unsuccessful you are, no matter how great of a parent you are or how bad of a parent you are, you're beloved. You're accepted. More importantly, it's not more important. Another thing it leads to, rest. It allows you to rest. The opposite of anxious toil, the opposite of restlessness is not doing nothing. It is having a posture. It has a position of rest. He gives his beloved sleep. When we are dependent on God, when we trust in God, it allows us to rest. It's about him. And so the call of this psalm is to flourish in life, to sort of beat the daily grind. We must center our lives on his love for us. At the center, at the core of it, is that we're beloved. We're accepted. We can rest. We can put our trust in Jesus. And then we begin to walk by his Spirit. We work through his power. We look at work and family and all of life through his perspective. And it leads to rest and joy and value. And when we're connected to something that's eternal, when it's an eternal power, when it has eternal purpose, it matters. What we do is no longer in vain. Your investment in your kids, Tiffany's investment in the kids right now, in Crosspoint Kids, it has eternal value. It's not going to just go away. God's going to use it. He's going to use it to build. And so the call for the Christian is to work from a position of acceptance versus working in pursuit of acceptance. The first leads to rest, and the latter to restlessness. And that's why every week we come and we tell of the good news of the work of Jesus, what Jesus has already done on our behalf. We get this acceptance ultimately from him. Jesus' life, his death on our behalf, his resurrection, his taking our ways that we fail, our toil, our vain attempts to be our own God. He takes that all upon himself. He's separated from the Father, right, to what? Bring us in as sons and daughters. And that can't go away. We're part of this eternal family. He protects us from the effects of sin. And when we know that we are in the center of God's love, when we know that we're the beloved, when we trust in Jesus for that, we can rest. And then we can work. We work from a position of rest. I'll close with this, some practices, some helpful practices that allow us, that help us work from this position of rest. Again, because there is a call to work. It's just what's motivating us. And the first practice that we can do to work from a position of rest is sleep. This is like the best application sermon ever, right? We can sleep. Verse 2 says, he gives his beloved sleep. This points to God's ceaseless, continuing, ongoing work on our behalf. C.J. Mahaney said, each night of sleep is a picture and parable of what it means to be a Christian. So when you sleep at night, it is a picture of what it is to be a Christian. So what do you do when you go to sleep? You lay on a what? Bed. Do you do anything to that bed? No, you lay on it. You are completely dependent on the bed, right? When you are a Christian, you are completely dependent on God. It's a picture of the gospel. When you sleep, are you doing anything to keep yourself alive? No, you're sleeping. It's a picture of the gospel. You're doing nothing to support yourself, and you're doing nothing to sustain your life. As a follower of Christ, you are doing nothing to sustain your faith. God is sustaining your faith. It's a gift. It's from him. So sleep, every night you're just preaching the gospel to yourself. I'm dependent on God, and he's going to sustain me. So sleep. It's saying God is in charge of everything. The things that keep me awake at night, he's got that. I'm going back to sleep. The second practice that we have that allows us to live from a position of rest is to Sabbath. It's what we're doing right now. It means to stop weekly. To take a day to stop from the things, the main occupations that consume our life, right? Pouring into our kids, working. It's literally just stopping. Instead of working and going, what are you doing? You just enjoy. It says, on 6 days, God created everything. On the seventh day, he stopped. He rested. God didn't not do anything. What did he do? He enjoyed his creation. So every seventh day, we have this practice that allows us to stop. And we can stop and we can enjoy because why? The Lord's building. The Lord's protecting. I don't have to. When your trust is in something else, you can't stop. You think it's all on you. And so you keep going. And so as Christians, we kind of fundamentally believe that, correct? Like, oh yeah, God's doing this. But do we functionally believe this? Can we functionally stop? And I'm not just saying you, I'm saying me. Can we functionally stop for a day and be reminded of God and worship him and remember him and celebrate him and be with one another, to enjoy one another, to care for one another, to encourage one another, and to enjoy the things that God has given us? One of my things of this 9 o'clock service, which we're moving to 10 next week, we've been getting done earlier. And so I can get home and just sort of like knock out on the couch for a little bit, like sleep, right? I'm just practicing what I preach. And this thing that's happening at like 2 o'clock, like I'm rested. And so we'll go grab dinner with somebody, we'll go play golf, or we'll go swimming, or we'll go fishing. Like, it's enjoying all that God has given us. And when we Sabbath, it's a declaration that my trust is in Him, that I'm remembering Him, that it's not all on me, that I'm dependent, not independent. And so He gives us this practice of Sabbath. Another one He gives us is a practice of solitude. And so if Sabbath is stopping weekly, we also need to stop daily, right? Too many of us can wake up early and just run. Friday, like I'm preaching it this week. So Friday I did not do this well, okay? Friday I woke up early, did a lot of good stuff, but then, Ashley swung by and I'm like, it was like 7:30 and I'm cutting the grass. I'm like, why am I cutting the grass at 7:30? I was supposed to do it like 2 o'clock, right? But it got too busy, and so I ended up just doing stuff all day. There was never this time of solitude, of rest, of being. And so we need that daily. Psalm 46 says, be still and know that I am God. The most probably famous version of this is the story of Mary and Martha, right? It says what? Mary sat at the feet of Jesus. She stopped. She enjoyed God. We need to do that as well. But it said that Martha was disturbed, worried, and upset about many things. You know what the word for worried, upset, disturbed about many? Anxious toil. Martha was full of anxious toil. And it says that Mary did what was right. Was there stuff to do? Sure. Mary stopped that and just enjoyed some time with the Lord. And so God's given us these practices to help us work, because we're called to work, but work in a way and from a position of rest. And these little things that we have, we get sleep, we get a Sabbath, and we get solitude. What's your takeaway from? Isn't this amazing? The psalm after God's called that I'm going to restore everything is, I want you to sleep, I want you to take a day off, and I want you to get a little quiet time. That's God's answer to restoring everything. Because why? He's going to do it. Church, let's be those people that trust that. Do we have work to do? Yes, it's everywhere. Go read the book of Proverbs. But let's be people who work as those that are dependent on God and trust that He is going to accomplish the work. He's going to finish the work. He's going to protect and provide security. He is going to give us the reward of our choice. It leads to a life of rest and joy. Let's pray. God, I thank you for the relevance of your word. I think it's one of the lies of our culture that it's antiquated, it's old, it has nothing to do with our world. God, Psalm 127 blows that whole thing up. Psalm 127 puts its finger on the challenge of our world, the grind of our world. God, the struggle of work, the tension of seeking the good of a community, the exhaustion that can come from raising kids. But God, we thank you for your perspective, that when we trust in you, when we depend on you, we begin to view and understand the world as you see it. And God, ultimately, at the core of your message to us is that we're the beloved. And when we live in that perspective, when we live in light of that, it brings rest. So God, I pray we would do our homework this week. I pray that we would sleep. I pray that we would take a nap this afternoon. I pray that we would even long to come back next Sunday in a different way, that our Sundays would look different. God, we live in such a busy culture that our other 6 days of the week just sort of easily pour into the seventh. God, help us to guard against that. Help us to anticipate and look forward to the day that we get to come together and hear your good news, the rest that you bring. And God, I pray that we would find practices every day that allow us to stop each day, to live in light of who you are, what your promise, that we would follow you in all things. In Jesus' name.